Good to see you all this morning. I see most everyone has survived the graduations. I know it's not like some people would have wanted, but I just wanted to quickly say, after seeing the posts and hearing about the great lengths that the folks in our area have gone through to conduct graduations, I talked to my mom in Pennsylvania, and she was shocked that everybody waited till now and actually had to have a service, because a lot of folks up there were not able to do services. They did kind of a drive-through situation shortly after school was out last time, and I just appreciate the above-board work that went into making it as special a day as it can be under the circumstances. And it makes a big statement, I think, to the kids about how much you appreciate and care for them. When you have 4 or 5 services and all the speeches are done 4 or 5 times and all the special music is sung 4 or 5 times, and every single time it's done as if it was the only time. And it's just, it's an honor and a credit that you try to do what you can during these difficult situations. Encourage you to be here tonight. We will be in Revelation chapter 15, and this is the last of the pauses before we start looking at the 7 bowl judgments, or vial judgments as they call it. And it is imperative in setting up what is going to be happening. In our morning services, we have been talking and working our way through doctrine study. We're going to be doing this for a little while, except for some of the special days that we have. And we wrapped up talking about the names of God in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and then we started talking about creation. And this morning we're very quickly gonna go through the 6 days of creation. And I believe it's important for a couple of different reasons. Number one, if we can't take God at His word about this, how do you take Him at His word about anything? And number two, when God chose to reveal Himself to us, He starts off in Genesis 1:1 and says, "In the beginning, God," and then He takes the next 2 chapters and He is going to reveal what He wants us to know very first about God, Elohim, the Mighty One. And He tells us how mighty. And I believe it's really, really important, because sometimes when we get bogged down in difficulties, sometimes when life is beating ever-loving daylights out of us, we get so fixed on the problem that we forget that there is an Elohim that loves us, works on our behalf, wants to have fellowship and a relationship with us, and cares so much about us that He sent His only begotten Son to deal with the biggest problem we could ever face. That's our sin problem. And so not only is it important that we look at creation from the standpoint that it is a revelation about Him, but there's a lot of practical application to this as well. You see a God who is very well organized, that is extremely intelligent, who has incredible attention to detail, and yet He's going to rip through that attention to detail in pretty severe understatement. I don't want to read the whole chapter, it'd take too long this morning. Let's just look at the first 3 verses. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, as we look at this passage this morning, help us to understand and appreciate how great You really are. It's easy when we are reading through something that we are somewhat familiar with for our mind to skip ahead to the details, and sometimes because it is so understated, we don't take the time to meditate and to think about how incredible each day of creation really was. So help us this morning to worship, because You really are worthy of it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. 6 days of creation in Genesis 1. He starts off with the first day. Now, it is interesting to me that he is just going to say, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The world was spoke into existence. And you look at it and you think, well, hello, it's not that big a deal. We've tried in evolution to explain how everything comes together with a Big Bang theory. Nobody can explain where the initial elements came for the bang. We try to explain away how life started, but nobody can explain the concept of life, let alone how that would start. The incredible design of intelligence that everything wraps together, and we'll conclude with that. But listen, folks, if you want to talk about mighty power, he spoke it into existence. Now, sometime if you have a little time and you just want to kind of impress upon your mind what an incredible statement that is, just start Googling or looking up some of the greatest things that have been accomplished in our world today. I had an individual that I knew who went out and visited Mount Rushmore. I have never seen it personally, have been fairly close, and was kind of disappointed that we didn't go by to see it. But I asked him, I said, how was it? And he said, well, okay, I guess. Some faces on rock. I really didn't think it was worth the time or the effort. And yet you think about, someone had a vision to take the bold face of a mountain there, and with massive amounts of dynamite and drilling, make it represent 5 presidents of the United States who they believed were key individuals in founding and keep moving forward what we know as the United States of America. Did they speak it into existence? Man, they worked hard. I mean, you look at the numbers and it's absolutely phenomenal how long and at what cost and what energy went into it. Empire State Building. And boy, when the Empire State Building was built, man, that was the measuring stick. Whoa. And now you look at it and say, we've got way bigger buildings all over the world than the Empire State Building. I mean, dwarfed. Right? How long did it take and at what cost? And so can I just suggest to you that maybe we ought to slow down every once in a while, and even though we are familiar with reading this account, maybe we ought to allow our minds to meditate and chew on the fact that he spoke and this huge planet existed. Now, you can go into the science books and they can tell you we believe the earth is so big, and if you were to drill a hole straight through to China, you would see this, and then you would see this, and you would see this, and you would see this. And can I just suggest to you that we surmise that that's how all this goes down? Because no one has ever started and drilled a hole through to China and taken core samples all the way through, and figured out exactly how wide it is and how big it is. I know somebody who knows. And he spoke it into existence. You can go to Answers in Genesis and you can watch that video where you go out through the stars and it's light years. By the way, if you want to blow some brain cells, just sit down and try and wrap your mind around a light year. How fast light actually travels. It's incredible. We're going to talk about how he created that. Verse 3, right? He creates light. Probably started the rotation of the earth at this time because darkness is the absence of light, and we know we have day and we know we have night. And so you sit down and you say, well, yeah, okay, he created light. He created something that moves so fast we can't even wrap our minds around it. And yet the practical application of it is we can create fiber optics which move things at that speed. That whole concept, foreign to our grandfathers, was created in Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. He said, let there be light. Can I suggest to you that anything that is bright, anything that is illuminating, anything that is revealing is an act of God? and comes from him, because that's what he is. He's light. And in heaven, we don't need any other light, because he is the light of heaven. Can you imagine what's going to be like when you walk around heaven and there's no shadows anywhere? And that would mess with me for a while. I mean, obviously I'm going to have a glorified body. Second day, verses 6 through 8. He is going to create the firmament. This word means to beat out, to spread out, an expanse. It is a very interesting term because elsewhere, like in Psalms, it talks about God being able to measure the heavens in the palm of his hand. And so it talks about how he beats out and how he spreads it out. Now, science today believes that it is continuing to spread and it is still expanding. In verse 8, we have a very key word. It says, "And God called the firmament heaven." You say, why do we call it the heavens? Well, because he named it. Why? What is the significance? Can I suggest to you, we're going to see it again, because he's going to name this planet Earth. We still call it Earth today. It's interesting that we call it Earth because God's the one that named it Earth. And if we really don't believe that there's a God, then we should change the name and call it something else. Why is it so important that he called it Earth and that he called it heavens? Well, did your kids get to vote on their names? Did you get to vote on your name? Who named you? The people who had authority over you, right? And so remember, he is revealing himself in the name Elohim, the Mighty One, and all throughout this passage there are little suggestions of the fact that he is the Mighty One. And so he is going to name this firmament that he spreads out. How far does he spread it out? I don't know. May never know till I get to heaven. But he knows, because he has the authority to do so. He named it the heavens. Why? Because he has the authority to do so. He is going to name this globe that we live on Earth. You know why he got to name it Earth? Because he has the authority to do so. There are three different heavens that the Bible refers to. The first is the atmosphere of the earth. The second is outer space, and the third is the place of God's abode. And what is interesting is their makeup of all three of those is different, and yet it just simply states that God beat it out. He spread out the expanse of it. Millions of light years were spread out in one verse because Elohim, the Mighty One, said so. He divided the water vapor. Verse 7, "And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. Some of it remained in vapor and become sky. Some of it was condensed." And what's interesting to me is he even set in motion the fact that we can see through water vapor and dust and things like that, or we'd never see a cloud or an airplane or the sun or the stars. He made an atmosphere that stretches out for millions of light years and is composed of different things, and yet we can see through it and appreciate the glory and the magnitude of what Elohim did. The third day is in verses 9 through 13. The dry land appears. He names it. He shows us his dominion. Now, what's going to be really interesting is he is going to delegate some of this dominion to Adam, and we'll get there in verse 28. But I just want to mention it right now, okay? When I was a principal, there were things that I was allowed to do and not allowed to do at the school. Who gave me the authority to do it and not do it? The school board did. And every once in a while, they would make up a rule that maybe I didn't necessarily think was the greatest one. I probably would have done things a little differently. It's not my job to make up the rule. It's my job to what? Exactly. So God creates everything. And then when we get to verse 28, he is going to turn around and he is going to give some of that dominion to mankind. What's interesting to me today is we are so hell-bent on taking that little dominion that was given to us by a higher authority and using it to write out that higher authority and act like he doesn't even exist. Where does that authority, that dominion over the fish and the animals in this planet that we call Earth come from? It comes from Elohim, the one that created everything. Might be important that we remember that fact. He's going to create the grass and the trees and the herbs. You hear people ask silly questions like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Has it ever dawned on you that maybe both of them came? I don't see animals starving to death while the grass is growing and the trees are growing. You know how long it takes a tree to grow before it can produce its fruit or before it can produce its acorns? And yet in a couple of days, in 6 days, God is going to do his entire creation. What are the animals and what are the fish and what is man eating while everything is maturing? He didn't create a baby everything and then watch it grow or make it grow. He created it with maturity. In fact, it says that it is able to reproduce, bearing seed after his kind and yielding fruit, whose seed is in itself after his kind. So not only did he create the concept of an apple tree, he created the concept of an apple which you're able to eat. He put its seed in it. He created pollination, and he knew that pollination was going to work because of other things that he created. And we'll get to that at the end too, because it all works together well. And he spoke it into existence. He wants to reveal to us something about himself, and he says, listen, all of the herbs with all of their variety, all of the grasses with all of their variety, all of the fruit trees with all of their variety, all of the nut trees with all of their variety, and in one day, he speaks it all into existence in various forms of maturity, fully capable of supporting each other and everything else that he is about to create. Maybe we just don't sit down and actually think this thing through long enough. Why is it that sometimes seeds are on the outside, like on a strawberry, but on the inside, like an apple or banana? Why do we eat some seeds? You know, you don't sit there and peel a banana and cut the thing up and start poking out them tiny little seeds, right? You just chomp the whole thing down. But how many of you have eaten a peach seed lately? Do you know that it says here in Genesis 1 that every herb, every tree, every fruit is good for eating with the seeds thereof? Interesting, because if you eat a whole bunch of peach seeds, it could actually make you sick. You can't eat, it's like a lot of other things. You can't eat too much of it. But doctors in studying curing cancer have found out that there are nutrients in a peach seed that it's like a superfood. I mean, goes after cancer with incredible force. And tribes that regularly have peach seeds in their diet have almost no cancer in their history. Maybe we ought to get back to eating some of the seeds and some of the skins and some of the stuff, because Elohim, the Mighty One, created it that way. He provided what was needed for man and animals before he even provided the man and the animals. And notice that he said after his kind. Been trying to grow some pecan trees. Went to my nephew's wedding in Georgia a little while ago, and much to my wife's chagrin, brought back a whole bag full of pecans that we picked up at the place that we stayed. Shelled a bunch of them and gave them to folks to eat, because I know some of the folks love pecans, and then I tried to grow some. Granny says you got to have at least 2 trees. I said, why do I have to have at least 2 trees? What if one of them dies and I only have one of them that lives? Oh, it'll grow and it'll look like a pecan tree, but it won't produce any nuts unless you have a second one to pollinate it. It won't cross-pollinate with other things. My wife loves a particular kind of apple, and so every time we move and go somewhere, I buy her one of those apple trees, and it says right on it, when you buy it, it will cross-pollinate with this variety, or this variety. Well, guess what happens if you don't have those varieties there? You can grow a great big fantastic looking apple tree, but you won't pick anything off of it and eat it. You want to know why? Because in his infinite wisdom, he made all of these things to reproduce after their kind. You look at it and you say, well, that's kind of foolish. I mean, if it could cross-pollinate with anything, listen, we come up with these weirdo things. I wonder if we could produce a tree that had 5 different kinds of fruit growing on it. And we do that kind of thing. But you know how messed up creation would be if an apple tree would pollinate with any other kind of tree? Would you eat a apple con? Not if you didn't like pecans, or not if you didn't like apples. In order to keep things functioning the way he designed it, and to teach us that the way that he designed it is such a good thing, he created everything to reproduce after its kind. Listen, we need to learn something about him. You are not going to improve on God's plan. That's what that little phrase in there simply means. He's going to say it again about animals. You're not going to improve on God's original plan. You know why you're not going to improve? Because it's Elohim. It's the mighty one. He doesn't need you to tell him how to make creation better. In fact, he built in safeguards to keep us from messing with it. Because that's what we do. You see, what's the practical application? In your life, when things go wrong and things get all turned sideways, we think we can fix it if we'll just do, wait a second, maybe we ought to be going back to his word because, listen, Elohim knows how to do things, and he knows how to do it right. So when we're done going our own way and making a mess of everything, maybe we ought to come back to Scripture and find out what God says about it. Because his way is going to work. You know why? His creation works, and it works perfectly. Day 4, verses 14 through 17. He makes the sun, the moon, and the stars. Now, when I was a youngster in Boy Scouts, we learned about a lot of the different formations, and I'll tell you, it's absolutely incredible that you can look at something and say, oh, look, there's Orion. There's Orion's belt. You have 3 stars. And when you look at it from the earth, they look like they're all flat and they're all lined up. But when you consider where they actually are in space, some of those stars are humongous, like bigger than the sun. But they're so far away, they look like they're the same size as the tiny little ones that are up close. And they only make sense if you're looking at it from Earth. If you're looking at it from anywhere else, none of those things make sense. And on day 4, God spoke, and it came into existence. Like billions, we got to come up with a better term. Uber-gazillions of stars. It doesn't even do it justice because there's that many stars in our galaxy, the Milky Way. We don't know how many more galaxies are out there, but we know that there are all kinds of galaxies out there with uber-gazillions of stars. And God speaks them into existence on one day. He's got blue ones and red ones and pink ones and white ones. He's got stars that twinkle because stuff is going around in front of him. And he's got stars that are really bright. He's got stars that are gassy. He's got stars that are hot. He's got stars that are cold. He's got stars so far away, it boggles your imagination. And he just spoke it into existence. He created time. God is transcendent above his creation. He doesn't work within our creation in and of himself. He doesn't need our creation. With God, there is no time, and we get frustrated because we want him to work on our time when we want our prayer requests answered, or when we, want to see something happen in our life. But there's no time with God. He created it here on day 4, and he created it for us. Lando, when he was a youngster, didn't care about time. It's not that he didn't know what a day was or anything. He did not care about time. I remember when he was in elementary school and we get ready to go on vacation. We made the mistake one time of telling him we were getting ready to go on vacation. He'd wake up the next morning. We packing? Are we leaving? No, honey. What? We're not going on vacation for 2 weeks. He'd look at you and say, how many go-to-bed wake-ups is that? That's the only way he measured time. You go to bed, you wake up. You know what he did the next morning? We packing or are we leaving? No, we still have almost. So we learned. You don't tell him. And about 4 days ahead of time, he'd say, honey, we're going to go on vacation in 4 days. Now that's 4 go to bed wake ups. And you think he's got this, right? You know what he does the next morning? We leaving for vacation. Not that he didn't know what 4 days was. He just didn't care. Think about this for a minute, folks. I know sometimes time is our enemy. But could you imagine, let's hold Sunday morning service. On Sunday, Sunday school starts at... Are you familiar with this? And our morning worship starts at... Oh, you're familiar with that. Can you imagine what it would be like if we were all to come together to try to worship and we didn't have time? How would you have a business meeting? Graduation services. 4 or 5 of them in a day. Could you imagine the fiasco if you told X number of kids to be here for the 1 o'clock, X number of kids for the 2 o'clock, for the 3 o'clock, for the 4 o'clock? What's an o'clock? Because there's no time. It would be total pandemonium and chaos. And Corinthians tells us that God is a God of decency and in order. And so we learn something very, very important about him, even though he doesn't have to have time as a part of who he is. An atmosphere clear enough to see him. What an incredible thing. Matthew 2:2, Luke 21:25, Acts 2:20, all testaments to the amazing, incredible acts of God. But can I tell you that the sun, the moon, and the stars, the created time, is also a reminder that God keeps his promises? In Genesis chapter 8, verses 20 and 22, Noah has just endured what? The flood. Everything in his life that he knew has changed except God. Right? Everything. The whole world that he knew, everything that was stable for him, everything that was known to him is completely upside down now. When he walks off the ark, the only really known factor is who's in control the whole time? God. He is going to build an altar and he is going to offer a sacrifice, and God comes to him in Genesis chapter 8, verses 20 and 22, and he says, as long as there is morning and evening and seasons, I will not again destroy the earth in this manner. So every morning when you get up and you see the sun come up, you know what that should be a reminder of? The fact that God keeps his promises. Go with me real quickly to Jeremiah chapter 33. Jeremiah 33, verses 20 and 21. Nation of Israel has right to be concerned because they do this constant wavy motion in their relationship with God. We love you. Oh, by the way, we're going to worship Balak. We love you. Oh, we're going to run off here and worship Moloch. Oh, we love you. We're going to go and worship And it's over and over and over again. And after dealing with them, if they won't repent, then God has to bring in a huge judgment. And it's happened a couple of times. So look at how he reassures the nation of Israel in Jeremiah chapter 33, verses 20 and 21. Thus saith the Lord, if ye can break my covenant of the day and my covenant of the night, that there should not be day and night in their season, then may also my covenant be broken with David my servant, that he should not have a son to reign upon his throne, and with the Levites, the priests, my ministers. Do you see what he says? You say, well, I don't see Israel functioning in that way right now. That doesn't mean that God isn't going to keep his promise just because it doesn't seem that way at the time. God says it is as sure that Jesus Christ of the seed of David is going to rule and reign from Jerusalem as it is that the sun is going to go down tonight and going to come up tomorrow should he tarry. It's just as sure. Just as sure. And to teach us something about him, he throws in there and he says, if you can do what? How in the world? Go back to Genesis chapter 1. If you doubt the promise of God and how faithful he is to his word, all you have to do is go back to Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and realize that it's Elohim that made that promise. The mighty one spoke all this stuff into existence, set it up to work the best possible way that it can, sustains the whole thing, and then he looks like he did at Job, and he says, where were you when I created? Same thing. Well, if you can stop the night, or if you can stop the day, then have at it. You can break my promise to David. But seeing as how we are a created being on day 6, I don't see how that's going to happen to you. It's important that we understand who Elohim is. The 5th day, verses 20 through 23. Fish and all the fishy stuff. Interesting, is it not, that God doesn't go through and say, and I created trout, and I created bass, and I created crappie, and I created bluegill, and I created, and I... We would have a book larger than our Bible to explain Genesis chapter 1. Wouldn't we? I mean, can you imagine how huge the volume would be if he sat down and individually just itemized the things that he created on these days? No, he just says, I created the fish. Well, what kinds of fish? You don't really need to know the exact fish that he created. All you need to know is that he created the fish in such a way that we have all of the species of fish that we see today. And by the way, some that we keep finding that we didn't even know. Isn't that incredible? I mean, man has been on this earth for how many thousand years now? 7 or 8? And we are still finding critters that God created in Genesis chapter 1 and going, ooh, a new evolved species. And God's face palming going, are you kidding me? Birds. I like to watch birds. Go out in the morning, sit on the porch, drink a cup of coffee, and just listen to them. And you wonder what they talk about. They understand each other. I don't understand a word they're saying. They seem to be happy when I put bird food in the feeder. Chirp, 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 and then here comes the crow. Caw, caw, and you're like, shoot that thing down. Look at verse 21. Boy, people get bent out of shape about some stuff. And there's a word here that we need to look at real quickly. And God created great whales. Why does he name whales? And he just says he creates the fish and he creates the bird. Well, whales is the Hebrew word tannin. It's also translated serpent in Exodus 7, verse 9. It's also called a dragon in Deuteronomy 32, 33, which is after the flood, by the way. Nehemiah 2:13, Job 7:12, and 30:29. In Job 7:12 and 30:29, he calls them dragons. The word is really reptile. Dinosaurs. All other kinds of reptiles. Job was familiar with the dinosaurs, and by the way, Job is one of the older books of the Bible, even though it doesn't come early. Probably fits in, Genesis chapter 12, somewhere in that neighborhood, so very early in man's history. In chapter 40, verses 15 through 24, he describes a behemoth. And in chapter 41, verses 1 through 5, he describes a leviathan. The behemoth has a really long tail like a cedar. You go through and you read those things and you look at them and you say, I don't think we have an animal around today that describes the behemoth or the leviathan. But God was bringing them up to Job and saying, listen, if you think you have a right to control things, if you think you have a right to wonder what I'm trying to do, then you please explain to me how you plan on domesticating or controlling behemoth or leviathan. Can anybody stick a hook in Leviathan's mouth? It's like a fire-breathing aquatic dragon. Now, I don't know about you, but these things must have been huge, and they must have been awe-inspiring, and Job's like, nope, not going there. Don't feel like fishing today. What was God saying? Listen, don't question me when your life gets difficult. Go back to Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and remember Elohim, who spoke all of this stuff into existence, can see it all, knows how it all works together. Why in the world would you question the mighty God? Reptiles are different than man. Man is not affected by longevity. We are full grown at around the age of 20. And so if you live to be 70 or you live to be 700, you're not continuing to grow after about the age of 20 or so. But reptiles grow over their whole life. So how big would a reptile be if it continued to grow for 700 years? Now you wonder how we could find these massive skeletons that are buried all over the earth, and it's because you have these reptiles that grew for a long, long, long time. And by the way, they weren't running around extincting man. Okay? The next phrase that we see here that's very important on the fifth day here is after their kind. It is impossible for one kind of plant or animal to produce a different kind. That is why there was so much variety on the ark, by the way. If it wasn't for after their kind, Noah could have taken 2 animals on the ark, male and female, just turned them loose afterwards, and how many, according to evolutionists, millions of years later, we would have absolutely everything that we see today. Right? If that were true. But God said, take 2 of every kind. Now, he didn't have to take 2 of every dog. He just had to take 2 dogs. Because God created dogs to be able to breed and have all these different breeds. And he gave us dominion over them, so we created poodles. Really. He allows crossbreeding between kinds, but not across kinds. And what it does is it shows to us the incredible variety and potential of each group. And Elohim spoke it into existence in one day. I love horses, I love cattle, I love sheep. I've grown up my whole life breeding them and taking care of them. We go down the road and sometimes the baby love's like, I know what that is, I know what that is, I know what that is. You can take this kind of cow and this kind of cow and breed it, and you know what kind of calf you're going to get. But you know what you can't do? You can't take a horse and a cow and breed them. Doesn't work. You can try it all you want to. It's not going to work. And you can go your own way and insist that your life would be much more complete if you could take this animal and breed them together. Or you could go back to the way that God set things up and realize that life is actually the most fulfilling when we do things His way. Because he set them up perfect. And he set them up perfectly because he is Elohim, the mighty one. And he can't be improved upon. Sixth day. We don't have the time to talk about mutations and all that. By the way, all I really need to say about mutations is mutations don't make anything better. So what evolution would like you to believe, it makes it worse. It's actually a loss of DNA. So if something evolves, cancer's an evolution. I don't know too many people that got cancer that got better from it. Sixth day, we got to move. Verses 24 through 31, and then over in chapter 2, verses 7 through 25, he gives us some more information. He creates the land animals. Now, what's interesting to me is he's going to give us 3 categories, and then that's it. That's all you get. It says, the beasts of the earth, the cattle, and the creepeth upon the earth. What fits into each category? I don't know. But we have biologists and botanists and scientists, and they've sat down and categorized all the plants and categorized all the animals and categorized all the insects and said this is this and this and this and this and this and this and this is a reptile and this is a vegetable, but it looks like a fruit, and this is a fruit, but it looks like a vegetable. And we figured out all the different categories of things that God created. And he says, listen, we're just going to make this simple. I'm going to create the beasts of the earth. Well, what are the beasts of the earth? Lions and tigers and bears and such. Cattle. And the things that creep upon the earth, like the snakes and the frogs and the turtles and the... And then he gets to man. And what's interesting is you have 5 days where God understates so much. And you get to the 6th day, and he talks about all the huge variety of the land animals he creates, and he just simply tells us, oh yeah, by the way, I created the beasts of the earth, the cattle, and the things that creepeth upon the earth. And that's verse 25. And then look at verse 26. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. That's more than he said about the cattle and the creeping things in verse 25. That's more than he said about the fish. That's more than he said about the birds. It's more than he said about the whales already. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. Do you realize that he didn't say he created the fish male and female, and he created the birds male and female, and he created the animals male and female? Because the fish and the birds and the animals never question it. Who's the only ignorant group that questions of creation, whether they're male and female? Supposed to be the smartest ones of the bunch, right? And he took special time, and he gives us much more detail, and he says, you are the only creation made in the likeness of God. Why, when you get up in the morning and look in the mirror, do you doubt your worth, your talents, your abilities, if there's anything special for you to ever do in this earth? You should look in the mirror and say, thank God I'm not a cat, or a squid, or a worm, because I was made in the likeness of very Elohim, who could have made anything after his image, but he chose to make us special. He gave us an intellect. He gave us emotions. He gave us will. We are different than plants, and we are different than animals in that we have intellect, emotions, and will. Now, animals feel pain, but they don't have emotions like we do. They're not as intricate. And there's something else that's really important about man. He created the birds, he created the fish, he created the animals, he created all the creepy things, but it says here, he breathed in chapter 2 the breath of life into Adam. He didn't breathe the breath of life into an herb. He didn't breathe the breath of life into a tree. He didn't breathe the breath of life into He created them that way. But he absolutely uses a different term for the life that he breathes into a human being. And that is why human life is so sacred and so valuable. And anything that attacks it or diminishes that, whether it's at the beginning of life, the middle of life, or the end of life, is a direct affront to Elohim, the mighty God. Because he took the time to do something special in man that he didn't do in any of the rest of the creation. He breathed into it the breath of life. And it says, it became a living, chapter 2, verse 7, soul. The Hebrew word is nephesh. Something that is going to live forever. Don't tell your kids. Kids, don't listen for just a second. Don't tell your kids that when their dog dies, you're going to see him again in heaven. Flush the fish down the toilet. It's the end of it. They're done. Bury the cat out in the backyard. You want to put a little stone or something up there, but cat isn't going to live with you in heaven. But the reason that sharing the gospel is so important, I don't go out to any of the cats on the back porch and try and tell them about Jesus Christ. They don't need to know. They just need food and water and loving. That's it. They're good to go. People need to know about Jesus Christ, because when they die, they're going to live forever somewhere. It's either going to be heaven or hell, and it's because God breathed into man the breath of life, and they became a living soul. And that soul is so precious, it was worth sending his only begotten Son to die on the cross of Calvary for. That tells you something about Elohim. It tells you how much he cares. It tells you how much he loves you. Seventh day, real quickly. You need to know two things. God ended his creation. That means everything's done. And no need for anything else to evolve. I told one of the guys at work, if I was a believer in evolution, I'd have 3 arms by now. You're standing on a ladder, barely holding on to something, holding the thing up there, putting the dish up there, trying to turn the thing. If evolution was true, I would have poked another arm out the top of my head so I could turn the wrench while I'm holding everything. Mothers would be created with about 6 arms. Everything works. There's nothing broken. There's nothing forgotten. And God rested. He stopped from his exertion. It means to cause to cease. It does not mean he was tired. Elohim doesn't get tired. He simply finished what he was doing. You say, how do you know? Look at the last verse of Genesis chapter 1. God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the 6th day. Why did he rest? Why did he stop creating on day 7? It was simple. He was done. Immediate creation, ex nihilo, out of nothing. All of it is good individually. All of it works together really well. Stick with me for 1 minute. You have to go to Psalm 19. Because in Psalm 19, I want you to see what Elohim is telling you. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night showeth knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out throughout all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun, which is a bridegroom cometh out of his chamber, and rejoiceth as a strong man to run a race. His going forth is from the end of heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there is nothing hid from the heat thereof. Get ready, because most of the time when we look at Psalm 19, we take this thing in chunks. We talk about the first part, or then in another message we come back and we talk about the middle part. But it's all one psalm. He is saying Elohim from Psalm 19, 1 through 6 is the same Elohim in verse 7. You ready? The law of the Lord is as perfect as creation. converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandments of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than the honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them is thy servant warned, and in keeping of them there is same one who created everything. The Elohim in Genesis 1 is the same Elohim that's later going to give us all his commandments and give us his word and say, listen, you want your life to work as well as creation works? We throw this thought in there. When we get to heaven, if we have done a good job, what does he tell us when we walk in the gates? Well done, thou good and faithful servant. And what did we read at the end of Genesis chapter 1, verse 21? Everything was... Do you see what he's saying? You followed the plan. You followed my word. Just as creation worked, so the Christian life is supposed to work. And when he looks back on a servant who follows his word carefully, he says, well done. Everything was good. It worked together good. It worked the way I designed it to work. Doesn't mean it was a rose garden, folks, but it works well. Now look at the last application as he wraps up. Who can understand his errors? Cleanse thou me from secret faults. The God who created the universe and the God who gave us his word is going to hold us accountable. And you stand here and you say, you're going to question God that he made a mistake? Who can understand his errors? Cleanse me from secret faults. Keep back thy servant also from presumptuous sins. Let them not have dominion over me. Then shall I be upright, and I shall be innocent from the great transgression. The result, when everything works together well, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Elohim, my strength and my Redeemer. Do you see? Let's bow for a word of prayer. Father, in the toughest times, may we look at your character revealed by your names. And may we take great strength in the fact that when you created everything perfectly. It is so good, and it works together so well. And you created your church, and everything in it is supposed to be designed perfectly, and it's supposed to work together good. And we as an organization, we come together with our differences and our different talents and abilities and likes and dislikes, and we're supposed to work together well. And when our sin mars the view we have of you, help us to go back to the Elohim, the mighty one that created everything, just spoke it into existence out of nothing. And help us to realize that the words of our mouth and the meditation of our heart needs to be acceptable before him. So give us the strength, give us the desire to serve you, to please you, to love you, because you truly are worth it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.